So have you heard about Remdesivir, and are you wondering, is this the miracle cure that we are waiting for COVID-19? Well, in this video today, we'll talk about exactly how this medication works, how it came about, the timeline of this new development, the 3 clinical trials, and what my takeaways on how Remdesivir can possibly treat COVID-19. Guys, let's begin. So you may have heard Dr. Fauci in a press release talking about the benefits of Remdesivir, how this may be the new standard of care that we have for COVID-19, and how this may change how we're treating this virus. Well, I'm going to talk to you about exactly how we came about with this statement and what options we have when it comes to Remdesivir. Does it work? Does it not work? And what is actually the data behind this? So before we begin, I have no conflict of interest. I don't know anybody who's in these clinical trials. I don't know anybody who's actually using this medication. My information is just for educational purposes alone. I know this may be confusing because a couple of weeks ago we talked about hydroxychloroquine, and before that we talked about Pepcid, and now we're talking about Remdesivir and how this may be the new miracle drug that we've been waiting for. So what exactly is Remdesivir? This is a class of medication that are called nucleoside analogs. And what these are medications that are very similar to the backbone of DNA and RNA. DNA and RNA are the genome that makes us, that makes viruses, that makes all of the life that's out there. And these are medications that are very similar to those backbones. It's actually an analog of a particular backbone in DNA and RNA called adenosine. Now, adenosine is part of the genetic code that is used to help make up life, including viruses. So what Remdesivir will do is actually will incorporate itself into the genome of the virus that it's attacking, specifically the adenosine part of the genome complex. And by incorporating into that genome, it actually will prevent the offspring of every other virus from replicating. So it actually stops the replication of the virus that it's currently attacking. So you know those spike proteins you guys have been seeing on some of the images for SARS-CoV-2? What actually prevents those proteins from replicating and thereby preventing the spread of the virus within the body. Us humans, we also have DNA as well. We have a genetic backbone. So our cells will recognize if there is a substitution between a medication and the adenosine, which is part of our genetic makeup. So because of that, so our cells will not incorporate that medication and will not affect us, but will affect those viruses that actually have that genetic component. Now, Remdesivir is not a brand new medication. It is much easier to use a medication that's already out there and maybe tailor it to a new situation. So Remdesivir actually came out whenever we had the Ebola crisis in 2013. It was going to be used in a clinical trial at that time, but by the time the drug came out, the Ebola outbreak had already subsided. But in 2018, there was another outbreak of Ebola in Africa, and this is when Remdesivir was used in a clinical trial in which they randomized using this medication, including other medications, to see if there would be a treatment benefit when treating Ebola. Now, during that clinical trial, Remdesivir actually was not found to be clinically significant in treating Ebola, so it was actually pulled from that trial. Now, that may sound like it's a bad medication, but in fact, by actually using this treatment on real humans, we're able to get some good safety data. In essence, we know that Remdesivir will not kill anybody, and we have some information on how this can actually work in actual people or human beings, not just lab rats. Now, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is a virus that causes COVID-19, actually uses the same replication process or the replication enzyme as Ebola. So it was easy to maybe transpose one medication in one scenario to a different medication in a different scenario, mainly the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So here are the timelines of how everything came about. On April 10th, 2020, the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a big journal in the medical field, came out with some information that Remdesivir has been used as a compassionate treatment for some patients who had COVID-19. Some benefit was noted, but they did not go into much detail, so we don't have a lot of information at that time. On April 16th, 2020, the University of Chicago leaked some information about Remdesivir. They stated that most of the patients who got discharged with COVID-19 were on this medication. But no one knows exactly what that means. I mean, what the heck does that mean? Nobody knows. We didn't get any more information from that. We don't know if they were better, we didn't know if there was a response, or we didn't know that they just gave this medication upon discharge. Now on April 29th, 3 trials came out at the same time, which I don't think was a coincidence. And also when Dr. Fauci made a recommendation on Remdesivir. So let's talk about the 3 clinical trials. Let's see exactly what the data says behind them. So trial number 1 was a trial sponsored by Gilead, which is the company that's making Remdesivir. Makes me think a little bit, something's going on there. Anytime you have a clinical trial that's sponsored by the company that makes the medication, it kind of pulls up some red flags, but I digress. So what they did is that they had patients take either 5 days of Remdesivir or 10 days of Remdesivir. This is considered an open label trial, which in and of itself can be very problematic. What that means is that every single person got the medication and every single person knew they were getting the medication. So whenever we have a clinical trial, we want to compare one medication to what's called the placebo, which is basically a sugar pill or no treatment. This allows us to get very good information to see if the medication actually works whenever you compare it to something that's a placebo. But when you compare multiple medications, or when you compare medications that everyone gets, that everyone knows that they're getting, it can bring up a lot of confusion in the clinical trial. But let's go into the data. So the clinical data did not show any statistical significance whether you treated patients with 5 days or 10 days. So we got basically no difference between a 5-day course versus a 10-day course. But also, more importantly, this paper was not published or given in peer review. And so we just basically had a press statement from Gilead that told us that 5 days of a medication that patients knew that they were getting did not have any benefit versus 10 days of the same medication that the patients knew that they were getting. So both patients and the doctor knew they were getting the medications. Now here's the problem with that, is that if I'm a patient and I have COVID-19, and I know that somebody else is getting the medication and I have the opportunity to get it myself, which in turn may make me tell my doctor, hey doc, I'm feeling more short of breath. And so me as a doctor, I'm gonna give you oxygen to put around your nose to help you breathe better. But if I'm giving you oxygen, that counts as a data point for a more severe case of COVID-19. Are you seeing the problems that are coming up here with this trial? Not a lot of good information we got from this, and it seems to be a very poor trial. Trial number 2 was actually done in China, sponsored by the Chinese government. Now this was a better trial. It was published in a journal called Lancet. This was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, meaning people were randomized to get a medication versus a placebo or no medication. Both the patients and the physicians were blinded. They didn't know what they were getting. They didn't know if they were getting Remdesivir, and they didn't know if they were getting just a placebo. Roughly 237 patients were included in this trial, and what they found is that there was no difference at all between patients who got the medication versus those that just had the placebo. No difference in terms of clinical outcomes. Now this may sound like it's not a very good trial, but here's the important thing you need to know is that this trial actually was underpowered. What that means is that this is in the later half of the virus outbreak in China. And so because of that, because of all the implementations that were going on with social distancing, making sure people were not getting out of their houses, making sure people were washing their hands, they actually did not have enough sick patients to be enrolled in the trial. So they couldn't have enough people in the clinical trial. And if you don't have enough people in a trial, it's hard to really measure if there's an outcome or not. So because it was underpowered, if the medication did help, we just don't know that information because we didn't have enough people in that clinical trial. So because of that, we can't say that the medication doesn't work. What we can say is in this particular population, in a population that did not have enough people, it didn't seem to work. But you cannot really extrapolate that information on a wide scale basis. We need more studies with more and more people involved. The third trial, which dominated the news, which Dr. Fauci talked about, was the one that really got a lot of press behind it. It's called the ACT trial, which stands for Adaptive COVID-19 Treatment. They had a lot more patients on here. They had about 1,000 patients, and they randomized once again for patients to get the medication Remdesivir versus getting nothing, the placebo. And once again, this is a double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized control trial. Fancy terms, but what that means is that the patients didn't know what they're getting, the doctors didn't know what they were getting. One set of patients got the medication, and one set of patients just got placebo or nothing. Now what their outcome was, what they were measuring is time for recovery. So let me ask you guys a question. If you were saying that you were recovered, what would that mean to you? Well, to me, that would mean that I am back to normal or back to what I was before I got COVID-19 or any virus. So let's say that I get sick with a cold and I'm sick, then eventually I recover. My assumption is that if I recover, I'm going to be back to what I was before. But this is not actually how they defined time for recovery. They defined time of recovery is that you were well enough to be discharged home and not be hospitalized. Now, this can mean a lot of different things because as a physician, I can discharge somebody home and they not be in the same state as what they were before. They may need rehab, they may need supplemental oxygenation, they may need more medications, they may not be able to do the same activities that they were doing before. So let's say, for example, you were a marathon runner before you got COVID-19. You got COVID-19, you got really, really sick, you had to be in the ICU, but you thankfully recovered, but you got discharged home. But you got discharged home with home oxygen, with weakness, with the inability to run. I will tell you, you are not the same as what you were before, but according to the study, you'd be considered a positive or a time to recovered patient. Now what they found was that those patients who got Remdesivir had 11 days of time to recovery versus 15 days for those that did not get Remdesivir. Now this study suggested a mortality benefit, but that was not found to be significant, statistically significant. Now we use things like statistical significance to help us know if an actual study can be used in clinical practice. We have certain criteria that we define throughout the whole medical community to let us know, hey, if you fit this criteria, I can say this is actually going to work, or this is going to be a medication that does what we need it to do. And that's how we define all clinical trials. Because if we don't have a standard, basically any Joe Blow can say, hey, this works because I tried it. And so we have specific standards in statistics. But with this particular standard, statistical significance, there was not a mortality or a death benefit. Now those patients who got the medication had an 8% mortality versus those that didn't, which had 11%. Now, even though it didn't reach statistical significance, that is a 3% change. And that may mean something, we just don't have the actual data to show that this is actually something that we can say, hey, this is a miracle drug. But more importantly, what actually happened is that in this clinical trial, they changed the outcomes. So whenever we do a clinical trial, we have to go through a clinical registry nationwide to register the trial. A lot of different reasons for this: patient safety, to make sure we do the right thing, but also make sure that what we are saying we want to measure is actually measured. But what happened is that they changed the outcome or what they wanted to measure in the middle of the trial. Initially, the trial was supposed to measure the outcomes of a disease severity based on a scale, but they changed it to time of recovery. So in essence, they changed the goalpost, they changed the finish line. It's like running for an hour, everyone runs, and then whenever you stop for an hour, that's considered the finish line. There's no defined finish line, there's no defined endpoint. It changed in the middle of the study, which can bring up a lot of different problems when it comes to a clinical trial. And another problem is that this study is not finished yet, guys. It is still ongoing. This is just preliminary data. The data that comes out later on may be different. It may be new. It may actually confirm something. It actually may change something that we already assumed. And so we don't have the exact data yet. So what are the takeaways that we need to know? Well, number one, like any new medication that's out there, we currently do not have all the information that's out there. So if someone touts that this is the end-all, be-all for a medication, look at the data, look at the research, and I can tell you when it comes to Remdesivir, we do not have that information. We currently do not have any good information that this is going to be the end-all, be-all for SARS-CoV-2 COVID-19. Now I hope it is, and I hope that data may eventually show that, but as of now, with trial number 1 not showing any clinical improvement, and trial number 2 not showing any difference in treatment, and trial number 3 showing a difference in the time to recovery, but no statistical significance in mortality, we just do not have the information to say that this is the end-all be-all. The other question I have is we don't know exactly what is the best outcome that we need to measure? Is it mortality? Is it people dying? Is it time to recover from the hospital? Is it also how you feel before you left the hospital versus after? Do you have the same quality of life? We just don't know exactly how we can measure success. Also, if this medication does work, is there enough medication out there for everyone? Because keep in mind, these are all patients in the hospital. It's an IV medication that we're giving. So for the everyday person who's out there who may have COVID-19, but is not sick enough to be in the hospital, we currently do not have a treatment for them. We can't give them all IVs. We can't admit them all in the hospital just to get this medication, especially if they don't meet other criteria to be hospitalized. In my humble opinion, I do not think we have hit the standard of care for treating COVID-19. There's still a lot of questions that are out there. We don't have all the data that's back, and we don't quite know exactly, is this going to be the game changer that we're hoping for? So what we do know that works in everything is social distancing. So despite the information that's out there in the news about possible treatment options, there's still a lot more questions that we have out there. And what we do know that does work by far is social distancing. Guys, do what you can to stay at home. If you have to get out, wear a mask, wash your hands, stay 6 feet away. We know these things work. We know there's evidence behind that. Guys, I want to thank you for watching this video today. Let me know, my question today for you guys, what questions do you guys have about Remdesivir? Comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. If you want more videos just like this one, I have a dedicated video course on COVID-19 that goes into more details about COVID-19, some things you may not see or hear about in these videos. But thank you for watching. Smash that like button. Don't forget to share and like this video. But guys, stay happy and stay healthy.